Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Do you have any items to record?
I do, Mr. President. Reference report from the Referencing Committee referring bills 957 through 978, as well as re-referring LB 830 from the Health and Human Services Committee to the Judiciary Committee, and a single reference report for a gubernatorial appointment. Additionally, notice committee hearing from the Revenue Committee. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. We'll now proceed to a continuation of debate on LB 364 and pending amendments. Senators Hunt, Blood, John Kavanaugh, Matt Hansen, Linehan, and Pansy Brooks are all in the speaking queue. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Is this my second or third time on this round?
I'm informed it's your second time.
Thank you. Thank you, Pages. Before we broke for lunch, Senator Wayne, my friend, we're just on the opposite sides on this issue. He said that his California friend called him and asked why we're so afraid of letting wealthy people donate money to help low-income people go to school. Why are we so afraid of educating low-income students? I'm not afraid of wealthy people giving money to educate low-income students. They can already do that. There's nothing preventing them from doing that. It's not a logical argument, that's true, but that's not the argument. Listen to the argument. Don't stop in the middle of the argument and close your ears and say, I hate it. Listen to the whole argument. I have been clear that the entire problem with LB 364 is giving money from taxpayers to private organizations that are legally allowed to discriminate. If we were talking hypothetically about some mechanism to expand school choice, to make it possible for kids with special needs or special circumstances to go to alternative types of schools and get different types of education, that's not something that I'm against. That's something that I do think people could benefit from, probably. I know that people have different educational needs. And, you know, as a parent, I'm not going to tell other parents what's best for their families. But what we can't do is take $5 million of taxpayer money from you and you and you and you and you and everybody watching and everybody in Nebraska and turn around and give that to organizations that don't serve the needs of every child. We have to educate every child in the state of Nebraska, including the gay ones, including the bisexual ones, including the ones who are gender expansive and are exploring this part of themselves. This is an extremely normal thing for, particularly junior high and high school students to be doing. Young men and women have always explored their identity and sexuality around that age, for centuries, forever, as long as humans have been alive. And there's nothing immoral or wrong about that. What's immoral and wrong is saying that gay people, that LGBTQ people like me, who are taxpayers, who are parents, that we have to allow our tax dollars that we give to the state to go to institutions that deny our right to exist, period. It is not about the merits of any type of education. I think that if my amendment to put the non-discrimination clause had been adopted, we would be having a very different conversation. And this is the same argument that I've made for the last 3 years on this bill. This bill has come up, many, many, many times in this legislature before I was here, and people made the same argument then too. And Senator Linehan has continuously said that she's open to suggestions, that she wants to get this passed, that we need to negotiate and we'll find a path, we'll find a way. Well, for me, the line is, don't keep gay kids out. All of these policies that we have from different religious schools in Nebraska that I was reading on the mic, it's not appropriate for taxpayer dollars, for public money, to fund that type of bigotry and discrimination. I would never infringe on somebody's First Amendment rights to hate gay people. You can do that, you can teach your kids to do that, that's your right. But we can't use public funds to enforce that, to say that that's okay. And, we're still debating this bill. We're debating the same bill. Senator Linehan had all interim to meet with stakeholders, to work with people like me who have a problem with this non-discrimination language, which I talked about last year. She didn't do that. The only difference between this bill from last year and the bill we're debating now is that we're in an election year, is that we have primary elections coming up. She's not working in good faith to make the bill better. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Blood.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I stand in support of Senator Morfell's amendment, and I am indifferent to AM 762 and the underlying bill. I want to start out by saying that I always have admiration for Senator Linehan. I always call her plucky because she never gives up. And I mean that as a compliment. And I have loved listening to the debate. Senator Hunt, Senator Justin Wayne, Senator McKinney. I love to hear the different views and the passion, because everybody today, be it Senator Kavanaugh, because there's two of them, Senator Hansen, everybody's standing up for the children, and that's a good thing. But I'm going to bring a different light that I have not heard on the mic. So in November, Senator Day and I were actually at a conference, and can I have the gavel? Thank you. And Leslie Heiner, who is Vice President of Legal Affairs and Director of the Legal Defense and Education Center for EdChoice, was the speaker. And to be very honest, I learned a lot about this movement, and it might come under different names and different organizations, but I learned things I did not know before, and it is a movement, I'd like to point out. Although the purpose was to convince us that those who believe public dollars should stay with public schools need to change their views, for me, it actually brought up even more red flags, regardless of the legislation that I've seen brought forward. And I'm going to walk you through some of the things that I left that presentation with. But I also want you to know that I've been speaking with Catholic families. And yes, I know this is not just about Catholic parochial schools who have the same concerns that I have, and also our homeschool families. And I'm going to tell you why they're concerned. So I want you to remember this. I firmly believe that it is he who pays the piper that calls the tune. So I hear many who support this movement, and it is a movement, say they want less government involvement in where they send their children to school. They want school choice, which I believe already exists, and therefore must be given additional financial resources to do this. But my question is, if you say you want less government, then why are you coming to the government for money? So I find that really puzzling. But here is what I know. This call for less government actually equals more government. You've got to be careful what you wish for. For example, once these funds become law, these independent schools that we speak so highly of, and as Senator Linehan has pointed out before, my oldest went to private school, to Catholic private school, that you feel are going to better educate your children may soon be met with the same rules that have stifled our public schools. We see it every single day in post-secondary education. That's a great example of what I'm talking about. Federal aid makes our schools and students dependent when they take that aid. And then the regulations are many and mind-boggling. Think about it. If something goes wrong at any of these schools that accept this money, accept this ability to utilize these funds, because it's the parents that are going to be accepting the funds, I promise you that choice opponents are going to want to regulate you. And if you believe otherwise, you are not paying attention to how government works.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Homeschool parents are concerned about this. Parents in Catholic schools are concerned about this. I haven't been able to talk to many besides those two groups. They feel that once these funds are available, that the next thing is going to be that they start being regulated more. And to think otherwise would mean that you don't pay attention to statute history here in Nebraska. We know that when there's a bunch of people who have hands in a pot, no matter how the money comes down, no matter where it comes from, eventually someone's going to be unhappy. And then what's the first thing they do? Knee-jerk reaction legislation. We're going to regulate you. We're going to make it hard on you. And we don't like what you stand for, so we're going to make it even harder for you to get your messaging out. That's human nature. Do I think that's wrong? I don't know, but I know that that's what happens.
Time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Blood. Senator John Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. So we're back from the break, and I'm trying to remember where I was before when we left, but Senator Blood's comments, I think, kind of tied in nicely with my comments, which is that she's correct that when you start giving people money, you ask for something in return. And that's kind of what I've been talking about all day, is that in exchange for a program that has a stated goal, I'd like some oversight that allows us to identify and determine whether or not the program achieves that goal. And so that is exactly what Senator Blood is talking about, is that for schools, programs that would take this money, I think that it's important that they be subjected to some record keeping, some identifiable metrics by which we can determine if we are getting improved outcomes for kids, because that is the stated goal, shared stated goal that we all have here, is better outcomes for kids. Senator Moorfeld's AM 1145 seeks to expand the record keeping and openness aspects of this bill, and would put a requirement on the entities that receive this money. And I think that is an important step. I think we need to go further. Again, Senator Hunt's amendment that received, I think it was 17 votes. Senator Hunt, does that sound right? I think it had 17 votes to advance, would have asked the institutions that voluntarily receive this money to hold themselves to a standard of not discriminating. And I join Senator Hunt's statement that everyone has their right to their opinion, and that they can discriminate in their heart if they choose to. But if they're going to do it on the state's dime, that they aren't able to discriminate on the state's dime, and we shouldn't allow that to happen. And so I think that is an important aspect that should be included in any kind of program. I can continue to go back to the studies that I've talked about earlier, but for me, the synthesis of this, without going any deeper, is that there are a number of studies out there, but they're only able to be studied by virtue of the fact that those states and the District of Columbia agreed that it was important to record that data. In Louisiana, in fact, they record the data, they go through it, they evaluate the schools, and schools have to apply to be part of this program, and they can be relegated out of it if they don't meet the standard that they have set. They put them into tranches or different levels, and if you fall below, then you wouldn't be eligible for the program anymore. And so I think, that is a robust, thorough process. And I think as schools would get those metrics, and they would find ways to respond to make sure that they stay at a level that's eligible for that. But again, they choose to apply, they choose to participate. I don't actually know offhand. I have to look because the study I read was about results and not about inclusion or about discrimination. But I think anytime somebody is getting something and they don't have to take it, I think it's not unreasonable to ask them to be subjected to oversight and subjected to being held to the standard that we all agree that people shouldn't discriminate. Schools shouldn't discriminate. It should be a safe place for kids to learn and to expand their horizons in a lot of different ways. So I do think Senator Blood's comments were a good lead into mine because of that. That I think that if we're going to give you
1
money,
minute.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. If we are going to give money to organizations, we should ask for something in return in terms of that they hold themselves to a standard of non-discrimination, that they report to us on the progress that they're making with the money that we're giving them. So I would urge your support of AM 1145. I would urge your support of Senator Hunt's amendment if we got to a point where it came back up again. And I'm sure I would urge support of an amendment to add testing, which maybe we'll get to at some point if I can figure out how to do that. Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Matt Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. And colleagues, this is my third time speaking on this particular amendment, and I think I keep running into the issue where I have more to say than I could fit into 5 minutes. So I'll just open it. I'm willing to take more time to get on. And part of the reason I say that is before lunch, I talked about my understanding of the difficulties in the Omaha area, because I do recognize that the genesis of a lot of this bill are the schools in Omaha and the relationship between that cluster of school districts, the number of different private schools in Omaha that are, quite frankly, in my mind, seems to be a higher proportion of the needs, the wants, the desires, and the opportunities up there. And the reason I mentioned that is to start making sure that I at least am helping to name the problem. I mentioned it taking another 50 years to sort out education in Omaha, and I didn't pick out that number randomly. I picked out that number because redlining was banned about 50 years ago. We had about 100 years of redlining. We're going to probably have about 100 years to undo it. It wasn't an accidental choice of my number. And I know there are 3 or 4 different generations of students who will go through schools in that time. And I don't necessarily know how to solve it in the meantime. When I was asked, what do I tell a parent today? I truthfully do not know what I would tell them. I do not. What I can tell them is that I am trying my hardest to fight against any sort of backsliding that is going to make our public education system worse. That's what I've been able to do in this body. That's what I've been trying to do in this body, and that is what I'm trying to do here in LB 364. Part of the reason I'm so worried about this is I think this is going to end up, rather than improving outcomes in Omaha, it's probably going to end up hurting outcomes elsewhere. And that's my fear. And again, not the 5 million, not necessarily the 4 corners of this bill, but this is a continued part of a trend to try and decrease the amount of money we're spending on education. Just plain, flat, and simple. Any dollar we spend in education is a tax dollar. A lot of them are property tax dollars. Therefore, the true way to lower property taxes is simply to spend less on education. And that's a problem that I personally have, that I know a lot of my constituents have, and a lot of the people who voted me and sent me down here have. We like Lincoln Public Schools. We want them to continue doing well. And so when there's issues on the front that I think are going to harm and weaken Lincoln, not necessarily to the benefit of any other student, I have my concern and I have to put up the brakes on that. And let me explain part of the reason I haven't, part of the reason I was so disappointed that Senator Hunt's amendment failed, and part of the reason I'm so concerned about this principle moving forward is about students with disabilities. You'll note the last line of Senator Hunt's amendment that we voted down talked about not discriminating on the basis of disability or special education status. Currently, private schools are not obligated to do IEPs for students with special needs, but public schools are required to support students in private schools if they have those needs, which is a fine system. But that's showing me that when we're saying we're going to give people an opportunity to try out private schools, we're not going to give everyone an opportunity to try out private schools, because I am seriously doubting, especially based on that last vote, that we're going to require private schools to start serving special education students the same way we require our public schools to serve special education students. So if this is part of an effort to shift property tax dollars, thank you, to shift property tax dollars by lowering enrollment in public schools, by shifting it to voluntary donations for private schools and all the things that and the others, At the same time, private schools aren't going to be accepting a proportional share of special needs students, special education students with IEPs. That's going to be disproportionately shifting to public schools. While at the same time, we're presumably going to be limiting their levy authority, limiting their spending, limiting all sorts of other things about them. I don't want to keep fracturing and having multiple competing school districts. When people talk about competition in school districts, I think places like Omaha show that that's not necessarily a great example, and that's not necessarily a policy I want to continue enabling here at the state level. I'll punch my light again and keep talking on this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Priority motion, Senator Hunt would move to recommit LB 364.
Senator Hunt, you recognized to open any motion.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. Colleagues and Nebraskans, without a non-discrimination clause, I can't allow LB 364 to advance. It's got a target on it now, and it's not going to pass. Have you listened to how many people are saying that education is a right? That education is a right, and therefore LB 364 is a rights issue. While at the same time, A, voting down an amendment, and B, not supporting a bill in the first place, to explicitly and literally, and not maybe, but definitely take civil rights away from children. It's really funny how we talk about rights in this body. What is and isn't a right? Yes, there is a right to education. The state of Nebraska provides that right through our public school system, which needs reforms, which needs change, which needs to grow and evolve. But the solution isn't LB 364 to say we're going to fix this problem and let these kids go to private school. Maybe this benefits a couple hundred students. Maybe this could also benefit one or two wealthy donors who take up the entire $5 million tax credit, who are only giving that money to help these poor kids because they're turning back around to the taxpayers with their hand out and saying, I would like all that money back, please. It's not giving out of the goodness of your heart. If you're turning around to the taxpayers and saying, the only reason I'm going to give this donation to help, ostensibly impoverished students, which we don't even know if this is going to help them. There's a lot of evidence that it's not going to actually. That's not giving out of the goodness of your heart when you turn right back around and ask for that money back in the form of a tax credit. Senator Wayne has said a couple times on the mic, he might have misspoken, but that this is a tax break. It's not a tax break. It's not a tax incentive. It's a tax credit. It's a dollar for dollar refund on your taxes from the income tax that you owe, based on a donation that an individual who may not even have any children, at stake here, to get all of their money back from the taxpayers. I think healthcare is a right. That's not a view shared by many people in this body. I think being able to marry somebody you love is a right. And that's not a view shared by many people in this body. So trying to come at this from a rights place is A, wrong, because there's nothing in LB 364 about rights. Nobody has the right to go to a school that will discriminate. That's not a right. Nobody has the right to send their kids to a private school that says, if we have LGBTQ faculty or staff or students or parents, that they'll either be expelled or that they're going to go through some kind of, reparative therapy or something to turn them straight, they think. Nobody has the right to send their kids to a school where if a young woman becomes pregnant, she gets expelled from that school. That's not increasing the quality of education in Nebraska. What this does increase is the amount of handouts that we're giving to wealthy people in Nebraska. Another thing I would caution people to understand and just, recenter yourself and think about this rationally. is that if you are frustrated with Omaha Public Schools, for example, if you're frustrated with your own school district, if you think public school is leaving people behind and you're frustrated about that institution, there is nothing in LB 364 that's going to impact Omaha Public Schools, for example, as an institution. If you vote for LB 364 to stick it to Omaha Public Schools, that's not what's going to end up happening. That's not what the outcome is going to be. The outcome is going to be harm to students who are in public school, teachers and faculty and staff at that school, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, custodians, all of the people who work so many hours, who are underpaid, who don't have COVID protections, who don't have enough paid leave, who are really struggling to educate all of your children. And yes, you can opt out of that system and you don't have to have your child educated by our public school system, but it is there either way. Whether you opt in or not, everybody in Nebraska has a stake in the success of our public school system. We need a strong, robust public school system. And if you're frustrated with the quality of public schools, voting for LB 364 is not the way to stick it to them. This isn't a way to punish public schools. What it's really going to just do is punish public school kids and the adults that love them and teach them. What we need to do is improve public schools by making them more equitable, by addressing that achievement gap, which there are many other bills introduced to do. I know many of us are involved with nonprofit organizations and other community activist organizations that are working on that issue. And we also know practically and reasonably, there's never going to be one bill that solves this problem, because there isn't just one problem. We need education that works for every student, not just for the wealthy, not just based on your zip code. And that's all true. And that's, a problem that we see throughout our state in the quality of education that people can access. But the way to do that is to improve that education access, to improve that support for teachers and students. Not to say, hey, 2 or 3 millionaire donors in Nebraska, we'll give you an incentive, we'll give you all of your money back to donate to these organizations that discriminate. What this is doing, it has nothing to do with rights or freedom. It's literally market distortion. It's government intervention in the free market, in markets of education, to change the price to give an incentive for a different type of behavior. I'm not even against tax credits. I think they can be good. We can use tax credits to incentivize types of behavior that we want to happen for the public good. But we have to acknowledge and admit that when we're doing that, we're distorting the market. We're taking the government and we're putting the government hand on the scale to change the prices of things in the market. For every dollar, for example, that I give to a charitable organization, like a public school organization or something, I can get $1 tax deduction. So my taxable income goes down $1. But because it's a deduction and not a credit, the taxpayers only lose about 30 cents on the dollar. Now, when we talk about a tax credit, which is what LB 364 does, taxpayers lose the whole entire dollar. So right now, any private donor, anyone with an interest in supporting private schools, whatever, they can give, the same amount of money, $500, $10, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 to support a private school, and they can take a tax deduction on that, about 30 cents on the dollar, and taxpayers pay them back for that, because that's where tax deductions come from. We pay for them collectively because we think that that's in the interest of the public good. Under LB 364, guess what? New prices in town. The price has changed. It costs something else now, and you get a
1
different
minute.
value for contributing to a private school. Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. If you donate $100 to a public school, you don't get a $100 tax credit. But if you donate under LB 364 $100 to the fundamentalist Christian school for officially hating gay people, then the taxpayers turn around and give you that $100 right back. Proponents of the bill are banking on people not understanding this stuff. They're banking on 2 or 3 millionaires writing their check to the school, giving that to their tax preparer and financial advisor, and knowing that in 2023, that donation is going to be taken out of their income tax. Because once again, only rich people need to understand this stuff. So ostensibly, this is supposed to be about helping lower income people with fewer opportunities. And we're going to see in practice, because we've seen it in all other states in the country where this is passed, that's not what actually happens.
time.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, priority motion. Senator Linehan would move to bracket the bill until April 11th this year.
Senator Linehan, you're recognized to open your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the first time I do believe I've ever done this. But there's so many things being said, I'm not gonna not respond. I don't appreciate being told I don't work in good faith. So, several points I want to make here. I'm going to ask some people some questions. First, John Kavanaugh, I don't know if he's here. It's fine if he's not, but this responds to something you brought up, I think,
Senator John
yesterday.
Kavanaugh, would you yield, please?
I'm not asking him to yield. I just want to make sure he's here so he can
Oh,
hear
I'm
this.
sorry.
So I have in front of me, and I've handed it out to all of you, from the District of Columbia's public schools website. Because I think Senator Kavanaugh brought up yesterday that he saw a study where the private schools weren't doing that much better than the public schools in the District of Columbia. And I'm sure there's a study that says that. This is not a study. This is actually from the public District Schools of Columbia's website. And they go back, so it was brought up yesterday, Washington, D.C. I lived not in D.C. because when we went to D.C. in 2001, it was not possible to send your children, if you had an option, to a public school in D.C. That is true. We lived in Fairfax, and I drove an hour each way every day. Plus, I couldn't afford to live in D.C. anyway, but it wasn't an option. But since 2009, when D.C. decided, as was portrayed in the West Wing film you all saw, they decided to stir it up in D.C. It was a tremendous fight. Mayors lost, city council, school board members lost. But this is what happened since they decided to experiment, take some chances. Since 2009, D.C. public school students have grown by 11 points in the 4th grade reading, 15 points in 4th grade math. Over the same period, D.C. public students' 8th grade graders, have grown by 11 points in reading and 18 points in math. It's 10 years, not 50 years, folks. 10 years. And these are the public schools improvements. In this same time period, and this should be critically important, it is to me, I know it is Senator Pansy Brooks and anybody else who cares about special ed kids, and I actually think most of us do, regardless of what's been said on the floor this afternoon. Last line, in the same period, the performance of students receiving special education services has substantially increased in both subject areas and grade levels, increasing nearly 29 points in 4th grade reading, 21 points in 8th grade reading, and 37 points in 8th grade math. And I'm not going to call on Senator Pansy Brooks because she can get up and disagree with me, but why is this happening? Because they're teaching them to read. Because a lot of kids end up in special ed and all they really have is dyslexia. They're just as smart as every other kid in the class, but when you stand there and you tell them they're not, and you put them in special ed, a kindergartner, a 1st grader can figure out what you're saying to them. You're saying they're not smart. And don't for a minute think that this doesn't happen today. It does. We've seen it. I have more studies if you want to keep going down that rabbit hole. Okay. Senator Arch, would you yield for a question?
Senator Archer, yield, please.
Yes.
Senator Arch, you worked a lot with Boys Town and mental health. You've dedicated a large part of your career to it, right?
Correct.
So out of all the hospital inpatient mental health beds for children, how many of them are under Catholic hospitals?
Well, I don't know have the exact numbers, but I can tell you this, that Kearney Good Samaritan, CHI, has children, adolescent, inpatient and residential treatment center care there. Emmanuel, CHI, has inpatient and residential treatment center, PRTF care there. For adult, Lasting Hope operates under the Bergen CHI license. And Boys Town has both inpatient and PRTF care.
So the vast majority.
Yeah, I think there may be one other psychiatric residential treatment facility outside of that list in Nebraska.
So the Catholic hospitals take care of most of our mental health patients.
When it comes to behavioral health children, yes, I would say so, yeah.
Thank you, Senator Arch. Senator Wayne touched on this, but maybe he's got more to say. I could go down the list of things that the Catholic hospitals, Catholic charities do. So do we have issues that we have faced in the Catholic Church? Yes, we do. But make it sound like we don't care about people? It's just not true. And I'm happy. Thank you, Senator Arch. Senator Wishart, would you yield for some questions?
Senator Wishart, yield,
Yes.
please.
I think somebody said earlier today that this was an effort to defund special ed, that we don't care about special ed kids. How much money do we give to private schools, parochial schools, the state? Well, let's start with what we do for state funding. Does the state, because you're on appropriations, does the state fund extra money over and above TIOSA, over and above needs for special ed in our budget?
We do, and over the years, you and I have funding the floor and saying that what we were investing in special education was not enough, and so we increased it.
And have I shared with you before that the whole time I worked in DC, I worked on this subject because the federal government has never fulfilled its promise?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. When we get up and say that the private schools won't take special ed, and yet in the equalized public schools, they get 80% of it reimbursed through needs and special ed funding, that's a little disingenuous. Maybe not even just a little. So we spent a lot of time on the first part of AM 762. Nobody's talked any complaints that I've heard on the early childhood, child care centers. Nobody's complained that I've heard this morning or had any concerns about it. So if you would, on the amendment, go to page 12, 2A. This is for the child care credit. It's in the same amendment. The credit shall be equal to either 50% or 75% of the taxpayer's qualifying contribution made during the taxable year, except that the credit for the taxpayer for any single taxable year shall not exceed $25,000 or 50% of the taxpayer's state income tax liability, whichever is less. Okay, so I'm fine with that. We're going to put that right along with my bill. That works. It's already in this bill. That's a simple fix. But I find it maybe just nobody's read this part of the bill, but nobody's had a complaint with this. And yet 50% on the scholarship tax credit is just like outrageous.
Senator Linehan, you have 1 minute remaining on this motion, and you're next in the queue, so you have 6 minutes.
And I'm going to give Senator Yield, thank you, Senator Wayne, all my remaining time. The last minute is the next 6.
Senator, are you giving him the remaining minute or the next time as well?
What? I'm sorry.
Oh, just say all.
Oh,
You were talking.
thank you. I can't hear you with Matt.
Senator Wayne, you have 5.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Linehan. This is one of those topics, if you haven't figured out when we walk around this body, is it makes you a little uncomfortable. And we have to start being comfortable with being uncomfortable in order to make changes. It's the uncomfortableness that we have that challenges us to be better and to do better. And we have to rise to those occasions. And this is one of those moments where we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so what we're doing, and we're hearing the arguments on the other side, is to make you comfortable with the fact that the realest answer out here was by Senator Hansen, who said, I don't know what to tell that parent. That's an uncomfortable position. And so we look globally, we try to dissect a way to make sure that you can justify the position. We say that it's not a right. We're not talking about right. We're talking about taxpayers getting credits and money to make us comfortable with this decision. This isn't a vote about anti-OPS, anti-teacher. This is a vote about a parent and a student wanting something better, wanting to access the American dream. That is, if you work hard and you get a good education, you can go far in life. So when you start thinking about the uncomfortableness, and in order to get comfortable, you go back to this broad, sometimes not necessarily completely true, sometimes true, to make us comfortable. It's because you want to stay in the comfortableness and not have to deal with that kid and that parent. I would never tell a kid, hey, I know you have a right to be who you are, but I don't want you to access that right today. I don't want you to be who you are today. I want you to conform to what, right? Just because they're not ready. They're not ready for you to be a black man who might be angry. They're not ready for you to be a gay man. Just wait. But we believe that that person has a fundamental right to be who they are. His body will say, hey, we don't want that person to be who they are today, because that's. But then on the same token, we turn around and say it is a fundamental right to have access to a high quality education. But not today. Not the system. Somehow $5 million is a slippery slope to something else. Not today, because we're going to give a wealthy taxpayer some kind of extra money. Not today, young child. And what's really interesting is most of the senators from East Omaha are saying, let's give it a try. Because we waited too long. You say, let's turn the ship around. Hansen said it may take 50 years. How many generations of that are my kids going to prison? If a generation is 10, that's 5. If it's 12, it's 3.5. Lost. 500 kids. Let's say from Omaha, 100 from East Omaha. That's not worth the pilot program? That's not worth giving them a try? So let's be a little uncomfortable. Answer the question to that parent. I got to wait 5 generations so my great-great-grandkids can have a chance at a better school? So let's
One
stop
minute.
all the noise, because that's what it is. It's noise. Look at the individual, and that's what this whole country was built on, the individual right. Look at the individual. They're begging for help. And this is just one pebble that we can throw out there to give them help. And with that, I'll yield the rest of my time back to Senator Linehan so she can withdraw her motion.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. I'm glad you reminded me to do that. I would like to withdraw my motion 124. Thank you.
Motion is withdrawn. Moving to the speaking queue, Senator Moorfeld.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just want to touch on a few different things that we were discussing here a little bit earlier today. So I've been reading through stuff and I've been working on a few other things in between speaking and listening to folks. And so I can't say that I've listened to the entire debate, and we certainly don't have a transcript here, but yet anyway. But I will say that I think we can all agree that we want to make sure that kids with developmental disability special needs get the resources that they need. Sometimes that can be accomplished in a private school. And there's some private schools that have special resources, special programs that are very much fit and tailored to that. And I think that's great. But we also know for a fact that there's some private schools that, even though they would like to have those resources, they don't. And they can't provide those types of tools and resources for kids who need them. And so sometimes kids are turned away, not because the private school wants to, but simply because the resources are not there. And in some cases, we also know, and Senator Hunt read off some of those policies that are literally on public websites of some of these schools, where private schools will blatantly discriminate against certain students based on the way that they were born. And so, as a policy matter, as a policy decision, I will not vote for a bill that creates an incentive for people to direct money to institutions that discriminate against people based on the way they were born, particularly the ones that blatantly say it on their website. This isn't all that complicated for me. And it's not about accusing certain institutions of not wanting to serve kids who have special needs. Oftentimes, I think these institutions that don't want to serve kids that have special needs are, not even oftentimes, I would say all the ones that I know of, even if I disagree with some of them, because they're not required to, and they also don't have a tax base. So I think we can all agree that most private schools out there probably want to serve kids with special needs. But fundamentally, I am just simply opposed to providing an incentive, even to the donors of these schools, when these schools can discriminate at will. I'm also opposed to creating incentives to funnel money to these institutions that do not have the same levels of accountability in terms of budget and where the money is going to as our public schools. Now, if we want to address mass incarceration, if we want to address systemic racism and poverty in our communities, I'm here. I've introduced a bunch of bills to do that. And I've worked with a bunch of the people that have stood up on the floor and talked about those pressing issues to pass their bills. And I will continue to. As a member of the Education Committee for the last 8 years, the vice chair of the Education Committee, I am here ready to work with you on creating program systems or putting more money into programs or systems that provide interventions to make it so that we Lincoln or out in greater Nebraska. I stand ready to be able to support those interventions to make sure all kids are successful in our public schools. That I just noted. And it's not about whether or not these institutions want to be able to help kids with special needs. I think we all want to help kids with special needs. But there are institutions that have specific
time,
policies to discriminate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Marfeld. Senator Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. I was not born yesterday, and I understand enough about the system and about the status quo, about the donor class in Omaha, about nonprofit industrial complex that we have in this state. If we lost 2 or 3 philanthropists in Nebraska, philanthropy is never a sustainable way to support an institution. Is the service any stakeholders over the interim. You prioritize this session, and I think you want to get to think which good Bill